Hi and welcome to part 3 of our Honda Spada series. This video is going to look at adjusting the valve clearances. I'm going to do the back cylinder. The front cylinder is pretty much the same. If the video doesn't run too long, we'll do the front cylinder as part of this video as well. Just to give you an overview, we're going to remove this cover, and that should give us some timing indexes and a nice easy way to rotate the engine using a socket. Then we're going to remove this little gem here to do the back cylinder. That'll give us nice easy access. We take this cover off and the valve plane will be underneath. To adjust the valves, we'll rotate the engine to the correct position to adjust the valves. The front cylinder I see is possibly a little more complicated. There's the cover there. So this radiator is definitely in the way. I actually want to drain the coolant on this engine anyway, because the coolant would be at least 4 years old. As a rule of thumb, if you're using the green coolant, you probably should change it about every 2 years. It becomes less effective after 2 years. You know, it's worth changing these things once you're putting like our project bike, if you're putting it back on the road and you know that it hasn't been changed in a while, then now's as good a time as any. So let's get stuck in. Okay, so all of this is done off the cuff, by the way. What I do, you see. There's not much in the way of editing, mostly my foul language. Oh, okay, nice and easy. I can see that this cover has been off before because there's just little marks around the edges there. That's a 17mm socket. It's not starred, it's a 6-sided socket, so that's exactly what you need when you're rotating these things around. Okay, so I've grabbed the light, and if we get right in there you can see various marks on that. I wouldn't say flywheel, because I believe on these things the flywheel's on the other side, but I could be wrong. It's been a while since I pulled one of these apart. And I haven't pulled apart this engine. I've pulled apart one of its cousins. It's more like its grandfather actually. But you can see that there are various indexes there for each cylinder. So you can see a top dead and a firing index down the bottom for cylinder number 2. And on the left hand side there we can see a firing index and a top dead centre mark for cylinder 1. And they're about 90 degrees apart, which makes sense because it's a 90-degree V. Anyway, we'll pull the light out of there. We'll find ourselves a socket. I'll try and keep my knee out of the way. It's a 14, so we'll take our 17 off. Put our 14 on, and that allows us to rotate the engine. Nice, so you can see what I'm doing there. I'm rotating the engine clockwise. That's the direction of rotation for this motor from this side. And I could actually test that just by flicking the starter motor, but I won't do that. We'll focus on getting the top valve cover off instead. Okay. Now, I'm just pulling out a 10mm spanner. Oh, now we're starting to get into the stuff that's never been removed before. Just want this tray out of the way because it will become quite a pain in the backside otherwise. It's becoming a pain in the backside anyway. So it has a number of tubes clipped onto its underside, which is nice and neat. And there is also a drain tube on this side. Oh, that's our drain tube disconnected. Hopefully this guy now moves forward and out. It does. Spark plug cap to remove. And we've got lots of goodies in the way. How annoying is that? The main annoying one is this guy here from the into the airbox. We'll pick him up and we'll tuck him out of the way, and these other guys aren't so bad. So that's the, here's the coil pack under my fingers. That one goes off to the front cylinder. This one goes off to the back. What we're doing here is removing 1, 2, 3 and 4 bolts, so you can just sort of see on my crappy zooming there, the 4 bolts. I'm actually doing is using the socket here. It's better. Using a socket to get a good grip on the head of the bolt. So there they are, finger tight. And slippery, hard to keep a hold of. That socket is just easier for me to grab. This is what we come up with, and you want to make sure you don't lose any of that stuff. So you've got a sealing rubber grommet there, the bolt itself, and then that washer there to go over the grommet. Between the rocker cover and the cylinder head is a rubber gasket. And they're fairly reusable, but the next step is tricky because we don't want to damage it. Your rubber hammer is your friend. Right, now notice that I didn't belt that. I just gave it a gentle tap. And out she comes. So, you can see the rubber gasket there. And that's going to be quite reusable. Now I'll see if I can give you guys a better angle on this. Okay, so that's our better angle. It's not too bad actually. It allows you to see what you need to see. Now I'm just going to rotate the engine. And I'll get you guys to watch what's happening. So you can see that the chain attaches to these two sprockets. Called tank chain, which has good tension on it too, I might add. Now that turns the camshafts. Now it's a dual overhead cam engine. Camshafts are in good condition by the feel of that. They're the camshafts. That's the inlet cam, and that there is the exhaust cam. One of the cylinders is coming up to the compression stroke. But you can see that the inlet cam has just closed the valves. The exhaust camshaft is coming around there, and it's going to open the exhaust valves there. Kind of see. And the inlet valves are opening again. So the engine's coming up to its compression stroke. You might even be able to hear that. So the exhaust cam is there. And the inlet cam is there. So if we split those so that they're both at about That's the top of the cam there and there. That will actually be fairly close to top dead centre. And we can even look at our timing marks on the side of the engine. That cover that we removed. And yep, we're about 10 degrees forward. So we're just slightly past top dead centre. So we'll rotate the engine back and then forward again till we're on that T index. To measure our valve clearances. Now this is really hard to see in there. Sadly. What we're actually doing is measuring the clearance between the rocker and the top of the valve. Valve clearance should be 0.15 to 0.2 of a millimetre. So I'm going to get a 0.178. That's on both inlet and exhaust. That's a bit unusual. Usually the exhaust valves are open, have a slightly higher clearance. We'll slide that into there first of all. We're measuring the exhaust first. Feeler gauge. The exhaust is good, so I'm not going to interfere with that. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. And that inlet is a bit tight. So there's that one. So let's go to the bottom end of the specification. Okay. And they're actually really good. And what we would usually do is loosen the nut off on the top. You can see the nut there, and then rotate the, I suppose we'll call it a screw, and that adjusts the clearance between the rocker and the top of the valve. However, as I said, if it ain't broken, we shouldn't fix it. So we'll leave that. And move on to the front one. So we'll get our valve cover. Put that back on. Just tightening them up at the point where they make contact. Getting my 10mm spanner. And incrementally tightening them up as I go, so that it pulls down evenly, and that way it will be less inclined to leak. I'm tightening them down to the point where they start to feel hard, like they're starting to tighten up. So I've gone from finger tight to hardening up. These don't have to be incredibly tight. If I was going to put a figure on it, I'd say about 15 or 20 foot-pounds. Doesn't bear a load, all it has to do is seal. The bolts themselves have a shoulder, so in actual fact that shoulder is hitting the top of the cylinder head above the thread. And that is, you know, when you're tightening that up, turning that further, all that's doing is tightening that section there, rather than squeezing down directly onto the rubber gasket and grommets. So it's an intelligent system. It stops you from over tightening it and putting too much pressure on the rubber grommets and the gasket. On the other side of the coin, you will strip the threads if you go nuts. So all you need is 15, 20 foot-pounds tops, and that's more than tight enough. Now we'll just move our fuel line out of the way. Pop our spark plug cap back on. better. The spark plug cap has a rubber seal around it there as well, and we're just making sure that that goes and sits properly. So it's tucked into its lip and no water can get in there. That's nice. Okay, so we'll have a look at the front one, and maybe with a bit of luck we'll get a better view of things, and we'll also be able to adjust one. Reconnect a few things as well. That's nice. I seem to have lost the screw for that. So I won't bore you with watching me find it. Alright, you can stop looking, I found it. It had moved around in my tool chest and it was under a tool. I always pick up nuts and bolts, and if it's going to remain disassembled for a while, I make a point of putting those wherever I can back into the threads that they came out of. And that means that not only do you know where it came from, but it's in a safe place and you can't lose it. If I'm only short-term dismantling things, I tend to throw things into my tool trolley, which is usually fairly good. But I've been busy lately and the tool trolley's a bit of a mess. Now, we still have that drain tube to deal with. Now that was pleasing in a way, that I didn't have to adjust anything. Sort of a concern though, because you can hear light tapping when the engine is cold, and I'd hate for it to be the source of a new video, how to replace the big end bearings on your Honda Spada. Now, coming around to the front, I can see that there's on either side a cap head screw. I'm hoping that if I loosen that, the radiator is going to hinge forward, but that's a bit wishful thinking, because I don't think that there is a great deal of movement in the hoses that are attaching the radiator to the machine. Let's see if we can find an Allen key to fit that. fine. Put that where I can find it this time. And we'll see if there's one on the other side and do that. Right, so what I'm looking at is the whether or not that has the ability to hinge forward. We do have some movement there. It's not really enough. Sort of contemplating how we should attack this best. I was hoping that we could do this job without removing the radiator. Got another cap head screw up top. So we'll have to have a look at it. See what happens. Okay. Oh, here we go. So I've got the Allen key. I've put a spanner on it for leverage. The trouble is that you're using the ball end of the Allen key, and that doesn't necessarily have a particularly good grip. Then he gets it. Oh, crack. Bolt holding the radiator in out. And that gives us some space, doesn't it? And the limiting factor is now the top radiator hose. What I'm going to do now is actually remove the radiator so you guys can enjoy a better view. You could probably work with that. It wouldn't be good, but you could get away with that without cracking your cooling system, but you would have to take your time and be patient. I'm planning to drop the coolant anyway, as I said, so I'm not going to lose sleep over popping the coolant open. We'll need something to drain into. Old burns. Never any shortage of action here, is there? Now, we're going to take off the overflow hose. Nice. Disconnect the top radiator hose from the thermostat housing. That's your thermostat housing. This guy here. Now there's two things that we need to anticipate. One of them is that the thermofan, which you can see here on the radiator, possibly just out of your field of view there, and there is a temperature sensor. So they're going to both come out quite quickly when I do this. That's a hose that hasn't been out for a long time. And I can also see the clutch cable runs through there. Guys around so you can see what's happening. Okay, so I'm just trying to take this clutch cable off, which is going to be a bit awkward. Whoever adjusted the clutch last did it from the crankcase end, which doesn't leave us a lot of free space at this end. Oh. Way up in the guts of the motor, just up underneath the air filter box. I found a connector. That guy there. That seems to be the only electrical connection between the bike between the bike and the radiator. That clutch is a pain in the bum. Backing that off. Should reduce tension on the clutch cable to the point where I can remove it. As starting to run out of things holding your radiator have it. That was our electrical connector, and that's really opened her up. I'll put this somewhere safe, out of harm's way. We'll work out the best angle for you guys. Okay, so this is about as good as it gets, I guess. I like the rear cylinder, 4 bolts, holding the valve cover on. Now the back valve part cover was quite pretty. Unfortunately, the front one gets exposed to a lot more garbage. It's nowhere near as good a condition. Probably a bit of paint wouldn't hurt. Now I removed the radiator. Let's pull that spark plug cap. I personally think, for your benefit, that was a pretty good decision. You could actually persevere with doing this with just taking the radiator mounting bolts out. I sort of think that this is the easy way to do it, and as I keep saying, I was planning to change the coolant anyway, so I'm certainly not going to lose sleep over the fact that I've dropped the radiator off it. It was a good opportunity to inspect the hoses. Try and take that off before I hit it with anything. On comes Mr. Rubber Mallet again. And once again, just a tap. Taking the cover off. The rubber gasket might stick to one side, to the rocker cover for example, on half of it, and the other half might stick to the cylinder head. And you need to make sure that if that's the case, that you loosen it all the way around, because that's how they get broken. And once again, now the front cylinder, the same as the rear cylinder, is dual overhead cam. So you can call this a dual overhead cam per bank engine, which is a bit of a stretch because it's only got 2 cylinders anyway. But but you have an exhaust cam. Now, easily identifiable by which cam is which. There's your exhaust pipe there, so that is your exhaust cam and exhaust valve. Your carburetor, on the other hand, is on this side, so that is your inlet cam. So you might have noticed that with this engine, it feeds itself quite interestingly, in that your inlet, your carburetors and all of the inlet comes in through the centre of the V, and your exhaust, of course, is on the open part of the V, which I've always found quite amusing. But of course, this is very common for V engines, even V8s. Of course, the inlet manifold is in the middle between the two banks. One thing that I should have pointed out with the with the rear cylinder, is that when you're bringing the engine up to the top dead centre mark, which we saw before, that top dead centre mark, it can show one of two things as far as the valves are concerned. When the exhaust valves close and the inlet valves open, there is actually a degree of overlap, and this creates an effect called scavenging, where the surge of the gases going out the exhaust actually draw the fuel-air mixture through the inlet. The overlap is generally pretty small. The larger the overlap, the greater the scavenging effect, but it brings your power up higher in the rev range, and this is one of the things that performance cams do. They increase that overlap and the overall duration of the valves being open. So the performance cams will open the valves sooner, close them later, generally open them slightly further. But anyway, we're sort of diverging there. One thing I should have pointed out with the rear cylinder is that when you're checking the valve clearances, you need to make sure that they're not rocking, that overlap is not taking place. Your valve, your camshafts are driven at a ratio of 2 to 1. So every 2 engine revolutions is 1 camshaft revolution. So that timing index actually comes around twice. But one of them is the overlap, and the other one is the point where the valves are completely free, and that's where you should measure them. Is basically your camshaft is a lump. You want to measure that on the back end of the lump, not on the lumpy part of the lump. Go figure that one if you can. Okay, so exhaust valve is opening. We can see that the exhaust valve, the cam lobe has come around and it's pushing the 2 exhaust valves open. Starting to close, and what we should see is, yes, the inlet valves are opening, so you can sort of see that one is snapping closed while the other one is just starting to open, and that's your overlap there. Inlet valves are now closing, you can see that up there, and we're coming around at the point where the valves are free. So this is where we line up our T index. And I can actually feel that coming up onto the compression stroke. And we'll have a look at our T index. Need to go a little bit further. I'm actually just going to run it backwards a bit. And that's our T index lined up. and these valves should be free. Yep. Now I do have another video that is titled, off the top of my head, something like valve clearances. What are we actually measuring? And that is worth having a bit of a look at, because that will give you an idea of what we're actually doing. And the trouble with this engine, of course, is that it's very hard to zoom right in on these components. So having a bit of an overview by watching that video first, even though it relates to the CB125E, a valve is a valve, and the configuration of this engine is a little bit different, but it's all basically, you know, the same theory. Just get in there with our feeler gauges. Okay, inlet is loose. And 0.15 it is anyway. So is the exhaust, particularly that one. Okay, 0.2, where do we stand? 0.2. That's all right. So there's that. So there's that. That. Now what I've done there is that the specification is 0.15 of a millimetre to 0.02 of a millimetre. So that's around about 5 to 8 thousandths of an inch. So I've gone to the smaller specification, which is the 0.15. And that gap that we're measuring, of course, in there, that is somewhere between 0.15, because I can slide the 0.15 feeler gauge in there. However, I can't slide the 0.2 feeler gauge in there. So that one sort of just. So what you should feel in that feel, when I put that feeler gauge in there, you should feel a drag. Fairly, it's a question of feel. I mean, you can feel that the service that it is a tight fit, but you've not actually depressed the valve to put the gauge in there. So that's why I like to show you guys the go no-go gauge approach. We're sort of going from the top of the spec to the bottom of it, and if the thin one fits in there but the thick end of it does not, the thicker specification does not fit in there, you know that your valves are right. They're somewhere in between those two measurements. So once again, we don't have to adjust the valves. The valve clearances on this engine on both sides are quite good. They're within specification. I'm not a fan of messing with things that don't require messing with, if that makes sense. If it isn't broken, don't fix it, because you're just creating problems, or you can do anyway. So what we have is an engine that doesn't need an adjustment. I'm going to adjust one of them anyway, or show you how it's done, just so that you know, and this holds true for whichever one of these valves you feel requires adjustment, what we'll do is we will loosen off the locking nut and move the adjuster, and you can see how it's done. So we have two tools, screwdriver, 8mm spanner, and not much room. So we're putting the spanner onto the locking nut. And the screwdriver into the adjuster. So the locking nut, basically we loosen that off. And this one's tough. So we'll take the screwdriver out. Oh, and there we go. Did we slip or did we unlock? We slipped. Oh, there we go. Find the feeler gauges. I'm going to select 0.15 when I adjust this. Just on the tighter end of the spec. I'm slipping that in there. Now, screwdriver into the adjuster. And when you go clockwise, which is tighten, it does actually reduce the clearance. When you go anti-clockwise, it increases the clearance. Now you might, depending on which valve you're doing, and what circumstances your engine is operated under, might depend on which way you need to go. Exhaust valves do occasionally recess on high mileage motors, and this will make the gap smaller. General wear and tear dictates that the gap will generally get larger. I'm sure that makes sense. Things rub against other things. So I'm just tightening that down. I get a good feeling of drag. And then we shall tighten the locking nut. Now when you tighten the locking nut, the adjuster itself might be inclined to move. So you should leave your screwdriver in there and just hold it. Now that has to be tight enough not to go walkies while the engine's operating, but if you over tighten it, it's going to do some damage. So once again, we'll go the no-go gauge approach. find it. 7, 8.2. Okay, so once again, 0.2 doesn't want to go in there. And it really doesn't. And I think I'm due for some new feeler gauges. These ones are getting a little bit... How you going? And our thinner one. Bent. Thinner one, oh, nice feel. I just think I've done this before. And that's it. That's how you adjust the valve clearances on a Honda Spada. Now, a quick visual inspection. Nice cam chain tension on this engine. According to the odometer, this has 71,547.3 on it, which is quite a big run for a small engine. Small engines, it gets down to how they're geared and how hard they're ridden, but you look at a thing like a postie bike, they're generally rebuilt at about 35,000 kilometres. I've seen CB 125Es with totally destroyed engines at 20,000 kilometres. But a lot of this is how well you ride it and how well you maintain it. If you don't maintain a machine, you can expect it to let you down. Now I'm just going to double check that that's tight enough, because if that goes walkies while we're riding, it's going to spoil an afternoon's ride. Okay, that's good enough for me. On a bike like this, I would say, well, Honda recommend that the Spada's oil changed every 5,000 off the top of my head. I would change it at about 2.5, 3 if you're a bit budget conscious. But it does get down to how you ride it, how well you look after it. When your oil is old, the oil package degrades, and it's the things that they add to the oil as much as the oil itself that determine the life of your engine. My test bike has untold kilometres on it, 50,000. I think it's had a few speedometers, so if I put them all together and added them up, I would probably find that that's exceeded the expected lifespan of, say, a postie bike significantly. And motors that I bought for the thing out of wrecking yards, with only 20,000 or 21,000 on the clock and shattered pistons. And this all gets down to lubrication and the care of the engine. Revving the crap out of most things does not make it go faster. You have to work out where your engine makes the most torque and then ride your engine to the torque curve. So you've seen probably videos of the CB test bike with the big bore kits. It sails along changing gear at 5,000-6,000 RPM. Around 8 or 9, it still revs quite freely to that. But all of the development that I did on the CBs was to try and give you more torque, not more power, and they are different. Torque is different to power. Basically power is an expression of torque at its highest RPM. So you want your bike to last its longest. There's no point in running it right up to the red on every gear change. You look like a tosser and you just don't go as fast. That's the reality of it. Let's put this back together and I'll spare you the lecture on riding your machine. This bike, for example, would be quite happy with me changing gears at around 9,000 revs. It redlines at 13.5. It climbs up onto the cam at about 7.5. So if I'm just chugging around, I would change gear at 6,000 revs. If I was planning to launch hard from the lights, I would probably do my gear changes at 10,000. If I was lining somebody up, I might spin it to 11. But the moment that torque drops off, that's where you need to start doing your gear changes. All right, time for the... Probably a coat of paint wouldn't have hurt this. But I like to keep bikes original. Especially when they start getting to this vintage. This is a 31-year-old motorcycle, and the sad thing with this particular one is that it's got a beautiful tank, but when the previous owner's sons rode it and did their learners on it, they both dropped it on a number of occasions, and there are some beautiful dents in this tank, and I mean that not in a good way. It's the original paint with the original sticker on it, so I've sort of thought about this for a little while, and I'm going to leave it as is with the dents. It is possible to have somebody pull the dents out of the tank. That will affect the paint. The current dents haven't affected the paint to any great degree. So, although it's wanged up, it's still original. You know, and when you start getting into the collectible phase of things, you've probably gone to vintage car shows and seen absolute rust buckets. But the thing is that in between the patches of, you know, the rust, there are patches of original paint, and that's desirable. The moment you start respraying things or changing things, the originality of the machine is lost and its value changes accordingly. There's very few instances where you modify a vehicle and its value increases in the long term. I want to make sure that that cover's sitting quite squarely, because we don't want an oil leak, especially on this cylinder, because it's quite a pain in the backside, as we've seen. I just want to make sure that we haven't swallowed any wires or anything like that that might be hanging down. Somewhere up there is actually the wire for the thermo fan. I'm wondering where that's gone. Ah, there it is. Tucked up right up the back. So I'm just tightening these down till they become hard. So they compress the rubber. There's another one. The name of the game with any rocket cover is to make sure that it doesn't leak. When you have machines with cork gaskets, over tightening it certainly doesn't do it any favours. Okay. sure that it isn't going to come off. As well. Well, see, I'm not putting my back into it. There we go. Spark plug lead. And that's that. Right, now we've got to put that radiator back on. Now, of course, with the valve covers back on and the job basically done, we've finished with this side cover here, and it is a good practice just to make sure that your engine's sealed up as fast as possible. Any dirt, just a single grain of dirt, can wreak havoc in your engine if it gets into the right place. So we've finished with the core of the engine, so we tighten her up. And then we know that any gusts of wind or any little particle of dust or even dirt off your hands, always keep your hands clean when you're working on engines. It's not going to get inside. So that's come up to what we'd consider to be finger tight. Now this cover, it doesn't hold anything on. There's nothing that's going to fall off. It has an O-ring seal behind it. That just needs to be tight enough not to allow any oil to drip past it. We do, however, want to get it off in the future. If not you, the next owner of the bike. So don't overdo it. You can see that was just a fraction of a turn. Not even an eighth, barely a 16th. Just enough for it to turn that little bit. Getting these guys off with an impact driver is a dangerous proposition. Magnesium, aluminium alloy crankcases crack. Absolutely. Especially when you're pounding them with an impact driver. Alright, so deep breath and we'll do that radiator. Now, our clutch cable runs up through a bracket. It's just there. Now I didn't see it because my view was interrupted, but you can actually see there is space for that cable to come out. That's life. I'm just going to press that there gently. Now there. That connector controls the thermofan, provides power to it. There's only that one wire, so I'm assuming on the thermostat housing here, that's where your temperature gauge is going to be, somewhere on that. But to be honest, I haven't even looked for that. It'll be there somewhere. In fact, there it is right there. So there you go, that's your temperature gauge sender. So, first up we're going to reconnect that wire because that's going to be an absolute pain in the backside to get to once it's back on. In my pocket I have the 3 cap head screws that hold the radiator in place. So you can see I'm sort of prepared for this. I have the Allen key as well. I might just grab my little seat while I'm at it. And the idea is to be prepared to throw this on in one hit. Radiators are quite fragile, also quite expensive. These radiators are still available. I don't want to spend $180 if I don't have to. So unlike everybody else, I'm not dripping with cash. pretty much doing that like this by feet. Which is fine if I can find what I'm feeling for. Which I can't. Allow that to drop down again. And just a reminder that you guys are seeing this as I go. I don't edit very much at all. And there it is. Enough room for me to stick my hand in there after the radiator's put back in place. That's just a little bit too short to reach the connector that I took out. Better. Wow, well, Honda, you disappoint me. And click. Once that back in place. Awesome. Should be able to relax that a bit. And our screw for the top mount. Again, feeling my way around. Nice. I'm just going to pop. Missed. So we've got some semblance of an alignment. should feel this starting by now, but I'm not. I'm not far off. I'm within a millimetre of being in the right place. Getting hard, so I have a feeling our thread started, and it has. Once you get the top one started, and by started I mean capably thrown on with a couple of, a good 2 or 3 turns, so it's not going to come off. Top hose is very short, so it's very hard to manipulate that once the radiator's back on. So your best bet is to take care of that before you tighten it right up. What I'm doing on this side now is the bottom mount. There's one on each side. So the radiator is retained at 3 points. And I'm just moving that around until I can feel the beginning of the thread. Appears to be something. So once again, leaving that one loose, go around to the other side, do the same thing. Excellent. We have all 3 of them started. I'm going around and I'm finger tightening all of them. So I've done the side. I'm on the top one now. Sorry you guys can't see this. It's just too much jumping around. And finally, bit of a mix there. Down the bottom. Top, spanner. Now these again are one of those things that don't need to be incredibly tight. I was going to put a number on it, I'd say about 25 foot-pounds. Just enough to stop the thing from coming off. That's all you need. Alright. The flow tube goes back on. We'll tighten that top on while we're here. Screwdriver. With a radiator hose, just until it goes firm. Okay. Now, I need to route this up here. That's our clutch cable. Side of the wiring loom. Go. Now I'm guessing it's 12. That's a reasonable guess. Clutch cable. Now what I did when I took this off, I backed off the adjuster nut on the right hand side only. So when I tighten that back up, it's pretty much going to go back to where it was. We only need it to be in the ballpark because we can adjust it on the lever. We're really just taking up the slack. Because I can't access the right hand one, I'm doing as I took it off, I took the tension off it, I loosened it off the left hand one. So that's back up. Let's figure out the cable. Right, now we're sort of getting to the end of it all. Now, obviously we've got to put some coolant in the thing because we drained it all. I actually found this a little odd. When I first bought the bike, I couldn't get the radiator cap off. And I couldn't work out why, and I had a closer look and found this nifty little screw. Now, that's actually a great idea. Anybody who's ever had a radiator cap stolen will tell you all about that. It's really good and convenient having your radiator cap stolen. Now the coolant I'm going to put in here is just purchased from a local service station, pre-mixed, and it's I've had a look at the label and it's suitable for mixed metal engines. Most coolants are these days. Back in the old days when engines were more cast iron, that would have meant something. I might just spin the motor over a bit. Knowing my luck, it'll probably start. Just to get the water pump going and get some of the air bubbles out a bit. Cool. Go. I'll put that back on, but we won't do the locking screw as of yet. So we want to check that. That's pretty much it. This is about where you check your handiwork. Have a look. Make sure you haven't left any unattached hoses, any wires dangling down. Have a look in your tool chest, make sure there isn't some extra bits in there. And then we pop the tank on and we fire her up. Okay, so just feeling the slack on that cable. Nice light clutch on this. You want to make sure there is slack on that cable to some degree, because if there's no slack you actually run the risk of your clutch partially disengaging. So that effectively is a clutch slip. So I'm just tightening the adjuster there. Take that slack out. That's around about where our slack is. And we'll tighten that up there. Okay, and now we're down to the bottom hose. Slide that back on. Once again, firm. Because we're clever, we're going to warm this bike right up afterwards and we're going to look for leaks. If you've got any doubt over those Jubilee clamps, by the way, any auto parts store that's worth anything will stock them. Wander into your super cheap auto or your Repco or your Autobarn and just present them with that and they will give you another one. Well, they won't give you one. They'll take a few dollars off you. They're not expensive. So don't cry if you break one. Sometimes when they get old they can snap from corrosion. They can also just be sort of similar to cross-threaded. That's like a worm and worm wheel arrangement. The way it tightens up, it can, if it's been over-tightened in the past, it can develop a bit of a bow in the actual strap part of it, and it won't tighten up properly, or it'll tighten and then loosen randomly again. So any doubt, just replace it. And if you're wondering, it actually goes in up and under into a slot in the tank on the front. Just like that. We get to wrestle with these fuel and vacuum lines. I'll wrestle with the fuel line first because it's the most challenging of the two. That actually went on fairly easy. I'm going to move the clip up so I don't have to get in there with a set of pliers afterwards. Just making sure that's nice and square on the line. Yeah, that made it more challenging. Vacuum line. So I've brought the engine up to temperature. I've even put the seat and tank back on it. I've looked for fuel and oil leaks. And the final step, now that the bike has cooled off a bit, is just to double check to make sure that there is some coolant inside the engine, which there is. There we go. And then we can tighten up our mysterious locking screw. Now we've got a bike that's starting to get a lot closer to getting a blue slip. From here, I think we need to address the mirrors as a definite, because realistically I don't see these little guys. I don't see them passing a blue slip, to be honest. They simply aren't big enough. There would be some RMS regulation about field of view and minimum sizes, I'm sure. I can't be certain of that, I'm just speculating. But to be honest, I don't like them. They're too small, and your life depends on those mirrors. There's, they do look cool, but they just don't cut it for the purposes of being a mirror, in my opinion. So from here, I guess we need to bleed the brakes, replace those mirrors, and then we're starting to get to the point where we can blue slip the bike.